welcome to the Shema podcast series, Strive for Truth. This series is based on the teachings of Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler, one of the most profound Torah thinkers of the early 20th century. In these conversations, I'm joined by Rabbi Michael Cohen, a longtime student and teacher of his work. This is not a series about inspiration or quick takeaways. It's about clarity, learning to see reality honestly and aligning our lives with what is real. My friends, welcome back to another episode of the Shema podcast and episode 2, delving into Strive for Truth with Rabbi Cohen. Rabbi, so good to be back here with you again.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
And this time in person versus via Zoom. I spent Shabbos reviewing these chapters. I'm glad to be able to go over it again with you and delving into this whole idea of the pursuit of happiness. I will tell you, as I said, dear friends, in the last episode, that I believe a lot that Rav Dessler is attempting to do is bring some clarity to some frameworks that we by default sort of acquired through our experiences, being exposed to bad information, lack of Torah, whatever it may be. But I think one of the most crucial things is to properly define this idea of happiness, and that's what he does. Because as you will see as you delve into this, is a lot of our definition of this idea is not truth. It's falsehood. So Rabbi Cohen, let's delve into this and start, if you could, by what Rabbi Dessler does at just sort of empirically, not going to Torah. No, he doesn't go to Torah. He doesn't go and says, our sages said this. He says, just look at the world, do your own research. You don't need to look to Torah to find out whether the standard definition of happiness is accurate.
So here's this letter that Rabbi Dessler wrote to his son, who was 16 years old and studying in Lithuania in 1938. In Lithuania, 1938. So this is just after the rise of Hitler, and the storm of war is brewing. Rabbi Dessler writes this letter to his son from London, and he says to his son, let's talk about happiness. And we look at the world around us, the world in England, the world around us, and we see that if we really look into people's lives, we see that everybody, without exception, has some pain point. Everybody's suffering from something. And if you could ask the wealthy, you could ask the poor, you could ask the middle class, you'll see that everybody's got something that they're lacking, something that is bothering them in their lives, and they look at their lives and they may, I've got a nice house, I've got a heart, I've got a wife, I've got kids, but my kids are not behaving the way I want them to behave, my house is not as big as I want it to be, or the job that I'm doing, I'm paying too much taxes, I'm being taken advantage by my boss, whatever it may be, everybody has some sort of pain point. And Rabbi Dessler asked the question, how could it be that God created a world in which everybody without exception is living in misery and anguish? That's the question that Rabbi Dessler has the audacity to propose at the beginning of this essay.
And he sort of goes through and starts with this false idea that money will create happiness, and sort of goes through rich people, middle-class people, poor people, and shows that this pursuit of financial abundance in order to find happiness is totally inaccurate. And we all know that. I know people from all spectrums, and they can be just as miserable with, hundreds of millions of dollars as they can be impoverished. So that can't be the answer. I even was talking about this with my family Shabbos evening, and really my wife and I were sort of really focusing on the conversation about going back through our life, and was periods where money was rolling in the door, was there a positive correlation with happiness with that versus when things get tight financially? And we saw there was absolutely none at all.
Right. And Rabbi Dessler points out that you talk to a person on a superficial level and say, yeah, everything's fine, everything's great. But when you dig a little deeper, you'll find people will say, no, well, you know what? This is a problem, that's a problem. We all face problems in our lives. And even the person who's poor or happy or wealthy, you find they have problems. And how could it be that's the state of the world?
Right. Why would Hashem create a world where we're all walking around miserable for one reason or another? And that's what he gets to.
Right.
So what's the answer?
So then he says, he draws the answer from something which is a text in the Mishnah, which many people have learned, which says that jealousy, lust, and status seeking removes man from the world. That's the world. In Hebrew it says, jealousy, approval seeking, and desires take a person out from the world. And he says, let's look at this word. Let's look at this world. He says there, the world. What does this Mishnah mean? What it means to say is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course God created a world which is happy. God is perfect, and God created a world where there's an abundance of happiness. In actual fact, more than that, we are even hardwired for happiness. Only there are things obstacles that we put in the way that prevent us from enjoying our lives. They prevent us from appreciating the goodness and the beauty that is around us. And those obstacles could be loosely put into three categories of jealousy, approval seeking, and desires.
These all seem to be very tied to the same thing. They're all very selfish desires.
Yeah, so Rabbi Dessler gets to that later on in the work of Mechtam Elyon. We come across where should one's focus be, and he speaks about that towards the end of the essay. But at the moment, the real point is that when we view ourselves, many people like to say, it's really a question out there. People say, how should we view a person? What is the default status of a person? And people say, even in the Jewish world, and even in the religious and Orthodox world, you find people who say, well, we just got to come to terms with the fact that we're broken and we've got to heal ourselves. Or we've got to create something new. I've got to find a new personality. I've got to find some new way of living. And Rabbi Dessler, I believe, is saying over here that's actually a distraction. That's actually a distraction from the beauty and greatness that there is within each and every one of us. And that's where this whole approach, Rabbi Dessler's whole approach, is really rooted in the idea that we are, each one of us, whole, perfect, and complete. And we have everything we need right now for a perfect, beautiful, wonderful life. And if we'll just connect with that, we'll actually find that we are actually sitting in the midst and right in happiness, and there's nothing else. But that presents a problem, though, because then you'll say, well, I'm going to be like a Zen monk. I'm just going to sit down and I'm happy, and then that's it. Where's the place for ambition? Where's the place for growth? Where does one move from there? Okay, I'm happy. I'm perfect. Okay, I'm going to sit down. Well, I'm not going to want food. I'm not going to look around me. Don't want relationships. What am I then? If I'm just sitting in happiness.
Right. Let's delve into this a little more, because I can see a lot of the questions that pop up. Is if we take this idea that I have everything I possibly could need in this moment, and we don't go out and try to acquire other material resources, then you will end up in a place where you won't have things you need, because eventually you will run out of things that can make someone miserable, like lack of food, lack of shelter, an upset wife. So how do you reconcile all that? How does he do so?
So, of course, listen, there's a dimension of our lives which is involved in making a living and going out and earning one's keep and paying taxes and paying one's mortgage and all the rest of that. That's all a part of it. But that's not true to our essence. And if a person wants to live a self-expressed life in this world and enjoy the world, there needs to be a focus on actually the world that one lives in and the beauty of the world that one's living in. So he speaks to yes, you have to earn a living. Yes, you have to do things. But where's your expression of yourself? Where's that found? That's found in a different type of ambition, not an ambition for material wealth, or to impress other people or to fill one's desires, but a world where one looks at ambition in a different way. One looks at an ambition as as he uses the word she'if, or something one is drawn to, something one's attracted to. That is, one has desire, earnest desires within oneself that one wants to grow and one wants to develop one's own character or one's own nature. And those are positive building blocks that a person can grow through. There's two different strands. There's one's self, one's world, who one is in this world, and That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God created each and every one of us in a beautiful world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, and He created us hardwired for happiness. But there are things that we put in the way that block us, and we think that those things are important when sometimes they're actually less important. That's not to say that you don't have to have desires, and if you have a desire for food and desire for sustenance and a desire to have a wife, and those are good desires. Those are not. He's not putting those aside, but he's saying just put them in perspective of really who one is. Those shouldn't be things that are defining who we are. Those are things that we do, right? So if we look at our personalities, there's who we are and there's what we do, and who we are is someone who's whole, perfect, and complete. Someone who has desires to grow and to become great in the world. And we'll talk later about the desire to give and to contribute to the world and contribute to others. To be that's who you are. And then there's things that you do. So I earn money. I function in different ways. That's something separate from that.
Okay. So basically, what you're saying is that what Rav Dessler is getting at is that what we're really pursuing is building and refining ourselves. That's what we're really where our happiness comes from.
Right. So
that's our drive.
So, yeah, that's what he says at the end of this essay. Towards the end of the essay, he says that this concept of directing one's ambitions. So people have different ambitions in life, and you find a person has an ambition to become wealthy or to become powerful or become strong. But, those ambitions are really great, but the truth is they are not gratifying. So we have, the Mishnah tells us, somebody has money. You have 100, you'll want 200. There's no point at which you'll ever say, oh, I'm filled, I've got enough money now, and I'll go and do something else. There's no point at which one can say, that's the nature of desires. The nature of desires is there's never enough. A person's always thinking in the desire vocabulary of something more, the next Everest, the next mountain, the next ambition, the next idea, the next company he'll buy, or the next mountain he'll climb, or the next your bank he'll buy, whatever it may be. You're in a never-ending cycle of trying for more, and it doesn't provide happiness. There's no happiness there. Where there is happiness is in spiritual pursuits. And that's what I mentioned before. That's when a person realizes it's not really about what I have, it's who I've become. It's who I am in life, who I am for the people around me, who I've become for the world around me. That's when one looks at the world in those regards, then happiness is definitely actually one's sitting in happiness, and that's an expression of one's happiness. So one becomes full, one becomes large, one becomes great in the world around them.
I think many would agree that people who are building businesses and at first may do so for material abundance, but when they look back, will tell you that what they really gained, and that's truly permanent, is how that experience of building the business forged their character along the way.
Right. Because you see in a business, a young guy might get into a business feeling that this is the way he's going to make money. But after a while, he sees he has employees who are dependent upon him. And he realizes that in actual fact, it's not so much about the bottom line. It's also about the people who he's benefiting with the service that he's providing, people in the company, the people who are customers. And it becomes much greater than just a way of making money.
Right. I was speaking with someone just the other day on this topic who's speaking at our panel discussion at the Masifta where you teach, and I work for you there as the economics teacher, and he was saying just that what made his business succeed was the entire ethos of the company was on improving the lives of everyone they encountered, from the customer to the vendor to the employee. And that's why he went from a company that, was able to, compete against all these large companies from a startup and basically surpass them, because he focused on that idea of the impact on other people. And that's basically what you're getting at here too, in this idea, is defining our lives according to how we're impacting those around us. And as an extension of that, as he talks about spiritual growth, what is spiritual growth is really nothing more than the relationship we have with our Creator. So maybe you can elaborate on those ideas some more from his teachings.
Yeah, so there is this teaching, the essential idea, which is not directly mentioned over here, but is that God didn't create us for ourselves. No person lives in this world for themselves. A person, that's like a selfish look. And sometimes people, and when they're young, or maybe even when they're old, but they look into the world and they think, oh, what's in it for me? Right? Where can I get ahead? How can I get ahead? And there's a point, I think, in many people's lives, and Rabbi Dessler is really talking to it right here, where a person thinks, it's not really about me. It's not really about what I can have, what I can, how I can get approval, or how I can have the next thrill. Actually, if I turn it around, I turn myself inside out, and I'm not looking into myself now, but I'm actually looking outside of myself. Now, all of a sudden, the world and the person becomes much bigger, right? Because now there's an opportunity for him to grow and to provide in a new way. And the pleasure that one gets from giving, the pleasure one gets from actually being there for somebody else, is much greater than the pleasure that one gets from taking. So that's an idea which has been proved scientifically. There was a guy, Professor Norton, I believe his name is, from Stanford University, did a study. He's a professor of economics in Stanford. And he did a study, like, doesn't get more pleasure from taking or from giving. And he proved that even a study that he did in Canada and then the United States, and then Gallup took it all around the world. And they're basically, besides for actually one country in Central Africa, they found that everybody benefits much more from giving than from taking. And that's the concept, the fact that we're a Tzelem Elokim. God created us as an image of himself, and God is a giver. And when we emulate God and we come godliness in this world, we actually become godly ourselves. And that's this idea that I believe Rabbi Dessler is saying at the very end. There's no happiness to be found in material goods. The happiness is to be found in spiritual goods. It's not what you have, it's who you've become. At the end of our lives, really the question that we're all going to ask, we can't take our wealth with us when we go from this world, but who have we become? Who are we when we come out of this world? We're given a soul and we come into this life and we go through this for 70, 80, and 100 years. But the question that we're going to be asked at the end is, well, who have you become? What did you do with your life? Not what did you get from your life?
Right. I think if anyone does the exercise, which is a good exercise that I should remember to do more often, is fast forwarding to the last moments of your life. And you get such clarity there. For one, for the Yetzer Hara doesn't have its entanglement on you when you fast forward and look backwards. And the neshama didn't come to this world with the desire to just receive as much material pleasure as possible, to eat chocolate and bonbons and, sit and drink whiskey all day or whatever. I mean, that's not why it's here. The last episode of this podcast I did with Rabbi Pill in the month of Shavat, we were talking about the mazel of the deli, the bucket. What we were learning about how it applies to Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher. And that's exactly who he was. What you're talking about here was he was bigger than everyone else because he was more humble than everyone else. He was just simply a vessel to serve the needs of other people. And that's what made him so great. And that's basically ties in so beautifully with what Rav Dessler, what you are saying right here. This is what defines us. It's not what we have, not what pleasures we derive from the world, not whether we have as much as someone else or whether we're being honored. It's whether we're giving honor, whether we are giving things to other people. Something else, I read a story like 5 years ago about a man who made tens of millions of dollars in Bitcoin, bought early on. And what the man was saying in the article was that, finally got to the point where him doing his job didn't make any sense. He was worth tens of millions of dollars. And how miserable he had become. He was really dealing with depression. God gave him basically all this material abundance or something as crazy as cryptocurrency. And then the man got left with well, now what's the purpose of life? My job, I was at least doing something constructive, helping people. Now what do I have? And when I read that, I was like, wow. That's when I was just moved here. And I was like, okay, that's why I moved here. Because we're getting to the heart of what life is really about. So Rav Dessler ends up with this idea of focusing the motivation on spiritual growth, as we said, As someone who uses this text to coach individuals, professionals with their life, what are some practical applications and ways in which we can now take these ideas, go out between now and the next time you and I sit together and do an episode, and begin to train ourselves in these areas and sort of retrain the way in which we view happiness?
Okay, great. So I think there's really three levels over here. The first level, as we discussed at the very beginning of this essay, is that we each have a constant dialogue which is going on in our brain, in our minds, and we're talking to ourselves. And there's a greatness, there's something to be gained from stepping back and observing ourselves. As we know, we have a body, we have a neshama and a yetzer hara, right? We have a physical desires, we have a neshama which desires spirituality, and we have this yetzer hara, which is negative self-talk, which is taking us in different directions. And there's I think what Rav Dessler is getting at over here, and this is what I use in my coaching, is that if one can step back and observe oneself, a type of meditation, just look and hear and see, observe the conversation that's taking place, and then realize that that conversation actually is not real, and it has no bearing on actually who we are. You have a possibility of actually connecting and reaching the point where you actually realize that you're actually above that conversation, and that's not really who you are. And then you can start touching to get to know yourself in a totally new way, and a very happy way, because as was mentioned, God hardwired us in this world for happiness. And happiness means actually being in harmony with the world around us, in harmony with ourselves. That's really that happiness. And that harmony is actually not far away. It's really inside of us already. That's why sometimes I like to describe this type of study that Rabbi Dessler is introducing us to as ontology, which is really the joy of being, the study of being, who I am, and appreciating who one is, and just basking in the greatness, in one's greatness. The exercise would be to actually take a moment and actually meditate. It's a type of meditation. It's just to observe what one's thinking, what are the thoughts which are going through my mind, and then to say, those thoughts are not actually me because I'm looking at them. So who am I when I'm looking at those thoughts? So I must be something else. So then what am I? And what are my desires? What's my ambitions? What's my she'ifas? What am I drawn to in this world? And when we get to that level, I believe the next step is to start, it's an exploration. Like, what are you actually? What actually do you want to do? How do you feel fulfilled? If it's not going to be material things, I think you might find, I hope you'll find, that the way you're drawn to is actually relationships and spirituality and something which is not tangible, but is actually much greater than that. And then all of a sudden you have different ways of expressing that in this world, through material things perhaps, but it might not be. So that's what I would say. If a person was going to go later and try and find something that they could practically apply to their lives, I would say, okay, take a moment every day, just stop. Don't try and stop your mind from thinking. Let it carry on thinking and let the dialogue run, but just watch it. And then watch and observe that you're actually looking at yourself, what you thought was yourself. And now you realize, actually, you're not looking at yourself. You're looking at a brain that's talking, and that's not who you are. I mean, if you get to that point, then just take a moment to contemplate, well, really, who am I? And what actually does drive me? And what do I really want in this world? And if you get to that point that you can say, what do I really want in this world? You might be surprised that actually what you want is not what you're pursuing at the present. And now all of a sudden, all vistas open up to you and the whole world opens up in a totally different way.
That is some great advice. We talked a lot about on this podcast about that there's a spiritual version of us and we have a physical version. We have a Yaakov and an Israel, right? And we're trying to bring out our spiritual version and getting that mindset that you are in a neshama in a body and your job is to elevate all of it, including the yetzer hara. I read an interesting idea from Rabbi Avigdor Miller over Shabbos on last week's Parsha Shmos. And he was talking about Hillel and like the whole time. He was talking about kindness and the impact of kindness. But in their mind, what they would say things like, I need to do an act of kindness. This body needs food. Or Hillel's like, I need to go wash this body. Like, because in their mind, the body was in their care. It wasn't who they were. And so when they fed it or washed it or maybe put some nice clothing on it, it wasn't a selfless act of kindness because the body was not who they are. And I was like, it's an amazing idea, but it's really what you're getting at. If we can stay in that mindset, which is how they got to. So you're suggesting one thing is simply just to remove ourselves from the chatter. And maybe, like you said too, I think starting to think through that, yeah, maybe we go to work every day, maybe we do this because we want to make money, but it becomes exhausting if that's all it becomes about. I think everyone can relate to that. But if we elevate all of that to a higher purpose of giving to somehow in what we're doing.
Right, so that's really the next level. The first level is watching the conversation taking place, just observing it. And then the next thing is this question, right? Well, so then who am I, right? That's really this question that one comes out of that. Who am I? I'm sitting in this happiness, but who am I? What am I in this world? What am I for? And then I think then that's an investigation. I think that's a very high level to get through in one class. But if we can get to that level where one's watching oneself, watching the conversation taking place, listening to the conversation, but then just say, that's not really me, then who am I? I think there's a natural point at which one veers off and thinks, I'm something much more than that. And actually, I'm quite fulfilled and I'm perfect. And now what can I give? Where can I be? Who can I be for the people around me? And I think that leads off into all sorts of possibilities.
And the next several essays that we're going to be going over with Rav Dessler. So I think the way this episode will sort of unfold, and I think the structure of it, Rabbi, and just for the listening audience is keeping them brief on one essay because they're very deep ideas. But, the audience can, I have many in the WhatsApp community are buying the text. I think what we can bring to the table and what can benefit me actually too is exploring idea a little more in depth and then providing these assignments. It's like the best learning I've ever done is taking an idea and then putting the book down and going out and contemplating it and thinking about it and trying to incorporate it. And I think that's if we do that here, then this podcast, this series will be a great complement to the study of the text. And I'm sure that's what you do with your clients that you coach when you use this text to help them with improve whatever they're coming to you for assistance with, professional life, personal life, et cetera, right?
Yeah, it's a matter of, that's the exercise that we do, right? The exercise we do is to step back, watch the conversation, and then to ask oneself, what do I want? What do I actually want? So,
and before we go, I do want you, because I'm curious. So you basically have used this entire book, this entire teachings, Rav Dessler, as a platform for coaching individuals.
Yes.
Is it specific areas, or is it just like I sort of...
So I coach people in different areas, executives and families and people, people in their family life, and then singles who are looking to have a happy life. Basically, what I say is I take people I work with men to untangle the confusion in their mind so they can live a happy and self-expressed life. So
beautiful.
We've all got tangled in our minds. We've got thoughts of things which are really dragging us down. And the idea is, through coaching, is to get away from that tangle and to view it as something separate and then relate to who one really is and then express oneself and really enjoy one's life.
Perfect. These ongoing essays provide further...
Yeah, and each one has a different exercise and a different aspect of life and a different expression that is innate to all of us. So in each one, giving and taking is the classic one, which we could do in a future podcast. But that's really, again, like I mentioned from the study from this guy, I think his name is Norton from Stanford University, where he studied, people and found that everybody really enjoys giving more than taking. So that's like a different perspective. It's a really transformation that one can go through in one's life. But that's just an example.
Okay, great. And if someone wants to get in contact with you and learn more about what you do or ask questions directly to you, is there do you have a website that they can go to?
So I have clients from word of mouth. Anyone's welcome to reach out to Rabbi Cohen at msn.com.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. I'm looking forward to learning from you continually on this great book and continue to grow as a result of it. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed the episode and found it meaningful, please take a moment to rate, review, and share the podcast.